The Arctic is a place which humans were never meant to discover. Even with all of the innovations of modern technology, we still fall prey to its cold, biting winds and bleak, desolate ice. These dangers are even more deadly for the explorers of the past. In the latter half of the 19th century, the Arctic ensnared an expedition of 17 men, leaving behind nothing but death, disease, and a mystery that would remain unsolved for over 130 years. This is the tragedy of Svenskhuset. Chapter 1: Stranded. The year is 1872. A group of Norwegian sailors are traveling across the waves around the islands of Svalbard, looking for seals to hunt. Seal blubber and fur were priceless commodities at the time, pushing men to brave the most dangerous places on Earth in search of riches. Svalbard is not a land for the faint of heart. The archipelago is located far, far in the north, deep in the Arctic Circle. The surrounding waters freeze over the winter, sometimes overnight, trapping many unprepared ships in the middle of nowhere. The hunters have set out in October, in the autumn, but are caught unaware by the terrible conditions. Their ship is suddenly locked in by the sea ice on the 14th, leaving them stranded near Grahaugen in the north. Luckily for them, they aren't the only ones in the area at the time. In 1864, a Swedish-Finnish explorer called Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld discovered highly valuable minerals and resources on Svalbard. He organized a return expedition and is now leading it on the archipelago. Nordenskjöld and his men come to the group's rescue in the nick of time. The hunters breathe a sigh of relief upon seeing the ships and begin making preparations to return home safe and sound. But when they start talking to Nordenskjöld's men, their blood runs cold. There's a big problem. The expedition doesn't have enough food or room to accommodate all of the stranded hunters. They need to leave behind at least 17 men to ensure they all make it out. It sounds as if 17 souls will need to be left behind to die alone in the freezing Arctic cold. But that's when some of the expedition men remember Svenskhuset, a house and outpost they built a few months ago on the archipelago. It's the oldest building in Svalbard, made of wood, but designed to withstand the harsh winter months. There's plenty of coal, food, and equipment inside its walls to keep all the men warm and fed. All they need to do is row over 200 miles south for 7 days straight. It's no easy feat, but the men prefer it to dying out in the middle of the Arctic. The hunters decide that the youngest, fittest men without families will make the perilous journey to Svenskhuset. Nordenskjöld's men shake hands with the 17 hunters, who descend into the sea and row away towards the horizon. Little did anyone know this would be the last time they'd ever be seen alive. Chapter 2: Don't Open, Dead Inside. Nordenskjöld's expedition runs with the men they rescued back to Norway successfully that same year. In the summer of 1873, Fritz Mack, a Norwegian captain, leads another expedition to pick up the men that had taken the journey to Svenskhuset. 7 days of rowing through the choppy, freezing waters of the Arctic Sea is no easy journey, but the rescuers remain optimistic. Seal hunters who dared venture to that part of the world were known as strong, hardy men. They were no strangers to life-threatening situations. Captain Mack's heart swells when he discovers that the men did indeed make it to Svenskhuset. Then it breaks when he finds, to his horror, what has happened there. When the expedition reaches the house, they find 5 bodies outside, wrapped in a tarpaulin. It's the only kind of burial the men could give their friends. The more they look around, the worse it gets. The rescuers try to open the front door, but it's been locked from the inside. A sign hangs above reading, "Do not enter." Mack's men break in shortly after, and the stench of death overwhelms them. 15 bodies are strewn about Svenskhuset, frozen in place. Some are resting on chairs, others are curled up in their beds. It's a horrific discovery that leaves the rescuers scarred. They decide to give their countrymen the only kindness they can offer at that moment and bury them in a communal grave outside the house. During their search, Mack's men discovered that one of the hunters, Carl Albertson, kept a journal where he detailed their stay at Svenskhuset. Albertson writes that over time, he and his friends fell more and more sick to a mysterious disease. Hans Hansen was the first to die in November. Then, around Christmas time, Carl wrote, "We are all now sick." The very last entry was made on the 19th of April, once all but Albertson and one other man were left alive. It detailed how a terrible sickness, like a curse, had swept over them and claimed their lives. All the men were gone. All that was left for Mac's expedition to take home was a haunting story of death and terror. Chapter 3: The Mystery Solved. The tragedy of Svensk Huset lived on through tales told around the hearth in Norway for many, many years after. Many began to wonder, however, how the men actually died. After all, the house was still filled with plenty of food and coal by the time Mac's men appeared. So the hunters could have kept themselves warm and fed for months to come. Experienced Arctic explorers chalked it up to the hunters' foolishness. They assumed the men must have underestimated the Arctic's weather conditions and had died to scurvy as a result. There were issues with this theory. First, the hunters all fell sick around the same time, which is inconsistent with how scurvy usually works. And second, Albertson's journal tells us that they all took the proper precautions to keep themselves scurvy-free. It was only 135 years later, in 2007, that a group of scientists set out to uncover the truth. They asked for permission to open the graves and inspect the bodies. At first, people were reluctant to allow this, as the cold had preserved some of the bodies incredibly well. It felt like a violation. But after some time, permission was given to the scientists to inspect bodies that had decayed beyond the point of recognition. They began their research and found that the men's remains contained incredibly high contents of lead, meaning that they had died from lead poisoning rather than scurvy. This wasn't the first case of Arctic explorers suffering the same fate. In the 19th century, preserved canned food was still a new innovation, so the cans themselves were made mostly of lead. This effectively poisoned all of the food held in Svensk Huset. The safe haven the hunters thought they found themselves in turned out to be a death trap. Nearly a century and a half later, the mysterious tragedy of Svensk Huset was at long last solved. The hunters were laid to rest, their legacy and honor restored. Theirs is a cautionary tale of the dangers of the Arctic. No matter how prepared you feel in the cold, bleak north, you are never truly safe.